start hearing about right now. So your mother worked at the courthouse for how many years?
54.
54 years.
She retired. She was the registered deed.
Well, how old was she when she started that?
I'm not sure, but she retired when she was 82. And then we were driving. My mother was a wonderful people person. She made it her business to know about your family, and I mean, she literally was a walking directory of, you can imagine being in public life.
Sure. And this is in which county?
McMinn.
McMinn.
And she, about 6 months after she retired, in fact, we were coming to Cleveland, and she looked over at me and she said, you know, you've given me some great advice in my life, but retiring wasn't one of those pieces of advice. And then she passed last year. She caught COVID and survived that. And she was in a nursing home, and she had dementia, and she could not remember to hydrate. So we were there every day until COVID, when we couldn't go anymore. And so she got a kidney infection, and she'd probably still be, she has many relatives that hit the 100 mark.
When she couldn't remember to hydrate, did she have other issues she couldn't remember, or was it just that?
No, it was other issues. Her short-term memory was pretty much shot.
So when she retired, she said it was a bad idea to retire?
Later, she would have stayed on, and she had some, what I would call slight memory problems when she retired. She needed to retire, but she loved people. And when I was a kid, you talk about public servants. She was a deputy clerk, I guess you might say. And I can remember many occasions as a kid. We grew up on a farm, on my grandfather's farm, and we had I can't remember what kind it was, but at one point our vehicle, I think, was an old black truck with a yellow door. I mean, we were just, but I can remember as a kid, she would load us up in the car, or truck, and someone would call her and say, hey, my son's here this weekend. I need to get a document or something, and she'd load us up in the truck or the car, and we'd head to the courthouse on a Saturday afternoon or Sunday afternoon, and she'd open it up, and that's service.
That's service.
And she believed in that, and so.
And the other thing is, they didn't worry about calling her and asking her.
No.
So that was something to be said.
No, when I first came back home to practice law, I never realized as a kid how many people she knew. But I was frequently in a jury trial or something like that, and I'd be choosing the jury, and the judge would say, you know, Mr. Cunningham, and I'd say, no, but I know his mama. Or I know his mother.
Would that disqualify you because they knew?
No, but it would come up frequently. Yeah. Or I would have clients come in and say, hey, I don't know you, but I know
when
your
somebody
mother.
says they know your mother, you immediately start making sure you don't mess something up, don't you?
You do. And she was sort of like on the, her name was a little bit different. Her name's Nadine, and they spelled it N-A-D-E-A.
Was my phone going off or yours?
Mine was.
You're busier than I am, aren't you?
No, well, I wouldn't say that. But anyway, so she was sort of like on a one-name person. If you think about it, there's not many people named Nadine. So in Athens, when somebody said Nadine, they rarely said her last name.
It's like saying Cher. Or Trump.
Yeah. And so she was, in the Republican Party. Her family was involved in the Battle of Athens. And when the Republicans came in, and so when of course she was in, I think in her obituary it said that she was involved in a political race every year since 1940.
Golly.
I mean, every election. She worked for a Republican candidate.
Yeah.
And so, and then I think it was in 2010 maybe, they gave her the Statesman's Award over in Nashville. She was proud of that.
What a life.
And just absolutely loved people. Never knew anybody. She's my mom, who loved people. We lived next to a horse stables, and I would go down and ride at this horse stable for the owner and work his horses out for him when I was a kid. And he had a couple of African Americans that worked down there, and they were part of our family. You know, on Thanksgiving, I can remember when everybody would gather. If they weren't coming up to eat, my mom we didn't eat until I had taken their food down. And she just had a love for people that you rarely find today. And nothing would tickle her more than if you called her today and said, "Hey, I'm going to come up there and visit you," or if you knocked on her door unannounced. Come on in.
What made her like that?
Don't know.
Just the way she was raised? Or
Yeah, well, her father was sort of like that. He started the Athens stockyard in the 30s. And he would go all over East Tennessee, Southeast Tennessee, and Central Tennessee. And this was before people did that. And he would buy farmers' cattle on a contract. And if you'll notice, well, you know, where the old stockyard was that he built, the railroad built him a spur in there. And he would ship cattle to the packing houses.
He was brokering them, I guess, you'd say.
Yeah, he would buy them and broker them. And I remember one time I was in my law practice was I started with Senator Baker's firm in Knoxville. And then when I came home, most of my friends thought I was nuts to leave that job. And I came home, you know, Alan Carter. I came to work for Alan's dad. He had a brain tumor. And David Herod was the judge. He was in this judicial district. And David called me and said, "Hey, Alan's sick. I'm going to go back." He had practiced law with him before he became the judge. David Herod had. And David was, I think, the youngest judge in Tennessee at the time. And I want you to come back and do all the commercial practice. And I wanted to come home, and you've been to my farm. I wanted my family to grow up on a farm and have some of the experiences that I did. And so I did. I was coming home basically to carry their briefcase, and when I got home I realized I'd had some really good training at Baker Worthington. It's now Baker Donaldson. Within a couple of years I had more clients than they did. And we had some fine lawyers in our firm. We had Gerald Bryant, who's now our chancellor, and Carol Ross was our and Mike Jenny's wife, Nan, Riley Jenny, and a young man by the name of Kenneth Chadwell, who's now probably the leading lawyer over in Cumberland County.
And this was all in one law firm in Athens?
Don Reed, David Herod, me, Alan Carter. Well, Alan had passed by that time, but so at any rate, I was doing a lot of transactions that not many people did.
Like what? What was this?
In Athens. Well, I knew enough about on the commercial side in a buyout to handle the tax and give some tax advice and structure the buyout where, you know, even today I run into things where sometimes lawyers and accountants don't put the two together and don't realize that, you know, there are implications after a buyout a year later or whatever, when you go to have attribution of the purchase price of certain assets, and it's more complicated than just sitting down and deciding how you and I.
You'd have to be sometimes you have to almost be an accountant, a good CPA to be a good lawyer, and sometimes you need to be a good lawyer to be a good CPA.
You might say that, yes. I had a guy call me last night about 9 o'clock talking about people.
Yeah.
He called me last night, and maybe I got a little bit of my mother in me, because people call me, and on the weekends, since I've been retired at the bank, I've sold 3 companies, and I'm doing some free work for some people, and some people who are sick and ill, and doing some fairly sophisticated estate planning. But I had a guy call me last night at 9 o'clock, and he said, "Hey, I know you won't mind if I call you."
Yeah.
And he said, "I'm not the smartest guy in Athens, and I figured out that wasn't necessary. I just need to know when to call somebody who is a little smarter than me." So anyway, I talked to him about his mother's estate last night for about 15 minutes, and but answering your calls is, a lot of young lawyers don't realize that, and a lot of young bankers don't realize that customer service is by far and away the best way to get business. I've gotten a lot more business in the banking business by making sure that my staff was trained better than others, that I had the top and best technology and knew how to use it, that my people knew how to use it. And I've gotten a lot more business from my current customers than I ever got on a chat room or advertising or so on and so forth. And I still think that's true today, is that really all the internet is, in some respects, is word of mouth.
It's just done faster.
It's faster. And so, but it has to start and have a genesis somewhere. And that genesis is born between our relationship. And if I exceed your expectations, you're going to tell people.
Can you get too much business?
Well, funny you should say that, or ask that.
Because that can be a problem.
That's why I went to the bank. My law practice after 12 years was just, and you probably are too, but I was a 7-day-a-week guy. And I realized that, I think it was the 8th year I was in practice. When I practiced, probably the best recognition you could get was to be designated an AV lawyer by the Martindale-Hubbell, which is a blind, secret rating that judges and other A lawyers give you, and it normally takes about 20 years to get one, and I got one after 8 years. You don't apply for it or anything, they just say, "Hey, Dee, in this same caliber," and the guy calls you, and it's a referral service. So like if you're in Florida,
I see,
and you have a wreck, and you say, "Jeff, I need a lawyer in Florida," I open it up and see who's the A lawyers. That's who I'm going to send you to, probably. But my business was just exploding, and I had a lot of commercial clients, including more than one bank. And the president of the bank came to me and said, "Hey, I'm going to be leaving, and we've been looking for I was on the board." He says, "We've been looking for a replacement, and I think you should come and do this."
And here you're practicing law.
Yeah. And my practice was fabulous. Mm-hmm. I mean, fabulous. I took a 75% pay cut to go to the bank as the bank president. And so,
what was the thinking about that?
It was time for me to take a sabbatical. It had, I loved it. I'd rather do it than eat.
Was it wearing on you mentally?
I don't think wearing on me. It was just I had sense enough to think that I need to be spending some time with my family.
So you were getting too obsessed with it, with the law practice?
Yeah, and the other one is I've always been, I'll try anything that's legal.
Yeah.
And so, actually, I turned them down. And I said, I don't want to do that. And about 4 months later, they came back and said, I said, well, look, I'm making a lot more money and money's not everything. And they said, well, what would you come for? And I think they paid me, I don't know, $125,000 a year, I think it was, which is a lot of money. But I was making
what year would that? What year would that have been? About
99. But I was making a lot more money than that, as I said, practicing law.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, I did it, and the greatest attribute I brought to the bank was I was not a banker. And I can look back and tell you that was that. It's funny how, I have an undergraduate degree from UT in, guess what? Banking. I don't know why. And then when I worked at Senator Baker's firm, I was in the banking and real estate section. Mm-hmm. And before that, I had worked as a clerk for a firm that had been hired by the FDIC to gather assets in the Butcher bank failure. And so I had done a lot of research about partnerships and that, you just don't normally do. They had partnerships and all kinds of connected entities. So I got exposed to that when you normally wouldn't have. In fact, the namesake of the firm came to me one day and asked me, he said, what do you know about, I was a clerk, I was in the library, he said, what do you know about partnerships? And I said, well, not much. And he said, well, you know more than most then. And he says, I want you to go over there in that corner and stay over there until you come over here and write me a memo that tells me everything I need to know about a partnership. So I did that for several weeks. I think actually a couple of months maybe. Uh-huh. And I wouldn't call it an arcane area of practice, but I would just say that it's not something that you get to that level in most of the time in practice. And then when I came home, I found that that I did know or had some experience that helped me gather clients and provide a service. So it was interesting how all that related together. Was that the Butchers had been involved in some mutual savings and loans and conversions, as we converted to stock. Right. And I did some research at that time, I think on that back when I was a clerk, and you couldn't have planned that any better. I mean, so I had a little bit of knowledge about that when we got into the financial crisis.
Which was 2008?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I went to the bank in October of 99. I went to the bank part-time for those last 3 months. I told them I needed 3 months to close my files. I wasn't going to leave my partners. So I worked diligently, and I'd work at the bank at night. Got all my files closed. My partner wrote me a letter and said, I'm so thankful.
And you're 41-ish.
Yeah, 40, I think. But what's funny, so I go to the bank, start on January 1st full-time, and think about this. My first 8 years at the bank, not having any experience, we had Y2K, the .com crash, 9/11, record low interest rates, the Afghan War, the Iranian War, and the Great Recession. Whew. And we made money like crazy right on through. Just using old, tried and true.
Which is what?
Well, what happens in banking, and of course, now I've got a lot more experience, and then I went on the board at Capstar when we sold the bank there, and then became the vice chairman of the board there until I just stepped down in May of this year. So I got to see a lot of different things and served as president of the independent bankers, and I was in a CEO group when I went to the bank in 2000, maybe in 2003. I got into a bank CEO group through the Tennessee Bankers, and that was a wonderful. I was in it for 10 years, and I went to the graduate school of banking at Georgetown. Is the ABA school offered at Georgetown for 3 years, and that was a good experience. One thing I've learned through the years, we could sit down and devise literally dozens of ways to take any bank, any single bank, and make money. Because you're balancing and managing the balance sheet and the income statement. And some people have more fees, some people have more loan revenue, some people have
less overhead,
so on and so forth. So we could sit here and literally play a game and have the same balance sheet to start with. And so what I'm saying is not the way to do it. What I'm saying is the way I did it. Because there are other ways. There are other banks out there. But here's my take on banking, community banking as a whole, is that today they tell you have to be in lots of businesses, but a risk manager. Risk management, that's the...
They wore that term out.
Everywhere, yeah. That's really just an old reminder, if you will, that you have to manage your risk in any business, and you have to do that. You have to attempt to know what the risks are, and you have to attempt to know what the risk might be, because you have risks that you can't necessarily see. And one of the things that I saw in 2008, I can remember some of my friends just making money hand over fist. And we were making decent money. But we weren't taking the risk that they were. And it was clear. And I would see the risk because we would swap business. There might be a bank in Cleveland that I would do a $10 million loan and sell $3 million to them, and then they would do the same thing. Well, I would see what they were originating, and I'd say, I don't want to buy this. Or I would look at their origination files and see that maybe they're not doing as good a job in their underwriting or their processing, which brings risk to the table as well. But one thing I learned over time, and the reason I think so many banks got into trouble, you go to meetings, and I've had bank CEOs say, well, geez, this economy has just killed me. And that would always bother me, because no, you killed you.
Yeah.
We've got 20 people or 10 people sitting around a table. 7 of them are losing money. 3 of them are making good money. Why is that? Well, they never stop to think it might be me. But what I learned in banking, and I'll say something about this in a minute, but I had a shareholder with a Fortune 500 company on the West Coast. He just called me up out of the blue after we went public in 10, and says, hey, I've looked at your balance sheet and your income statement for the last few years, your FDIC reports, and I'm going to invest some heavy money, and he was the president and CEO of a worldwide company. He said that my hobby is investing in community bank. And then when we go to the beach on the weekend, my wife hits the beach, I look at financial statements. And I think at one time he was our largest shareholder. And he and I developed a friendship. But one of the things I learned from him was that to be a risk manager, you have to understand the continuum of time in which you're measuring the risk.
Now say that again. That was interesting. The continuing of time.
The continuum, the period of time, if you will. So it might be better explained like this. If you look at banks from 2002 to 2006, they made a bunch of money, right? Bunch of money.
Bunch. Everybody did.
Yeah, if you couldn't make money in your business and my business, you didn't need to be in that business, right?
Right.
And then in 07, it didn't look so good. And then in 08, the bottom started,
And in 09, it really stopped.
9, 10, and 11 is really when the banks suffered.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, that always happens, or generally happens that way, because the banks, it's like snipe hunting. You went snipe hunting when you were a kid. The banks are holding the bag. And
They're the last ones.
The last ones. So when it gets to that. But here's my point. If we were sitting somewhere on January the 1st on 2006, we might conclude that all those bankers were reasonable risk managers. But if we measured the time period to 2012,
the continuum of time,
they weren't very good risk managers.
Or if you started measuring them in 08,
they were terrible.
They were terrible.
Well, but most of the people that got in trouble didn't get in trouble for what they put on the books in 08.
That's right.
Back in 06.
Yeah.
And so, it's like everything else in life, you have to have balance. And you can't, every opportunity is not a jubilee. It brings risks to the table, and you have to be able to manage that. And so we got into 07 and 08, and the things started getting bad, all over the place in New York and all the money center banks. So we were a savings bank, which meant that we were owned by the depositors. And some of the banking regulators were asking people, banks, you need to put in more capital. But in a savings and loan or a savings bank, you don't have anybody to put in capital because you don't have any owners. The ownership kitty, if you will, is just a compilation of the earnings. S&Ls were created in the 30s for the purpose of providing liquidity to local building, so you would build more homes. So what they would do is you and I would go out and gather up $1 million, not in investment, but deposits. And we would put that in the bank. The bank would pay us, and then we would loan it to build homes. And the spread, or the net spread, then if we made any money, went into the owner's equity, which was owned by the depositors. And that's how you start a savings and loan, a simplified version.
It was like Bailey's building and loan on that.
Sure. It's the same thing in a credit union, basically, is that, the credit union, they want to expand their philosophy, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so you'll have a big credit union will just loan money to a startup credit union to get it started, and then they'll pay it back.
Were you nervous in 08?
I was not, and I told you when I first sat down, the best thing that ever brought to the table is I was not a banker. All right. So in 08, I didn't own any bank stock. And right, and we didn't have any bank. We didn't have any bank stock. And then number two, I knew I could go back and make more money doing something else. I wasn't worried about it. Now, was I worried about doing the right thing? Sure. Was I worried about my employees' jobs? If something happened and the thing went under. There's a lot of gossip in the banking business about the government taking over the banks. You remember that?
Oh, yeah, and that stress testing.
Yeah, you're a bank investor, That's not something that you want to hear come out on the wire.
My knuckles were white.
Yeah.
And I don't even own that much.
Yeah.
Let's take a break. So the stress testing, that's so far over the layman's thinking that we have no clue. Now, what even all took place, but my understanding was that like the bank regulators came in and started basically trying to manage these banks to where everybody didn't collapse, and added more regulations to the banking industry.
Well, they certainly added some regulations to the banking industry. I couldn't really speak to that because we were not a troubled bank. I don't have the list. I don't remember what the list was, but you remember they came up with TARP.
TARP, yeah. $5 million.
Well, you could get a lot more than that, but so they wanted people to take, especially the community banks, Troubled Asset Relief Program is what it stood for. And we did not take TARP. We were one of the few banks, might have been the only bank.
Should you have taken it?
No. And I'm not critical of it. It's just that we weren't losing money.
Did they have to pay it back?
They did. They got like 5 years at a really low interest rate, and then some of them that didn't go under, who were troubled, then that interest rate jumped up, and that caused some problems in years 5 through 10 or whatever that second was.
So if you used to take it, you could take it but pay it back in 5 years, so it was just a boost. It didn't.
It just had enough capital, and they made all kinds of crazy rules about you can do reappraisals, you could buy a troubled bank, for $1 million and have it reappraised, and it would. And whatever that appraisal went up, this is a simplified way to say this, but the increase in the appraised amount gave you, quote, paper capital.
Back to what you was talking about,
yeah.
6 ways to make a bank look good.
Yeah. So, back to the time that I was doing research as a law clerk and a law student, one of the things I researched was, how does a savings bank become a stock bank? And I think I even wrote a couple of memos on it, I'm not sure, but I had enough. That's not something that most people know.
That would be hard to do.
Just because, so they keep talking in 08 then, spin forward 20 years. And I told my board, I said, we should become a stock bank. And everybody looks at me, and I remember I had one director who said, explain that to me, and I explained it to him. He said, well, that won't work. He said, you couldn't sell $1 million, because you couldn't do it.
No.
I said, well, I respectfully disagree with you. I think we've got a product that's built on trust and great service, and I think we can sell $10 million. And it's not that I want to do this, but I'm smart enough to know, or knowledgeable enough to know, that if things really get out of hand the next couple of years across the entire industry, and they say everybody's got to put in capital, we're done. We don't have any capital. We don't have any owners. If we go around the table, if you and I own a bank, and you own 20% of the bank, and I say, Dee, you need to put in another $1 million to protect the $5 million you've already got there, you're probably going to put in that $1 million. You're not going to just let it go under.
No, you
But-
have to
yeah,
throw
but if
that
you don't
much
own
at
any
it.
stock in a bank, and I say, hey, how about putting in $1 million to keep us from going under? You're going to laugh at me. There's better places to put your money. But we were making money, as I said, and so we had many meetings about this, and I understood the process. And I think that was something that I brought to the table. Wasn't planned, but it was just fortuitous because I really did understand the process and I could see the end result. It was difficult to see the end result for most people, in 2010.
And you were also seeing the possibility of what if.
Yeah. And it was just a deal of you're measuring the risk again. And the risk is that things get completely out of hand.
Which was a possibility.
Sure. Well, it was a risk. And you don't have any scientific way to measure that. But if you're a trader, you measure that risk all the time. And I thought, we can do this. And I understood how excess capital worked. That some people didn't. I was not an expert, but I understood it. So, and one of the things I told the guys at Athens Federal when I went there, with the very first meeting, first day I was there, I said, look, I've never worked for a number 2 law firm. And I'm not going to work for a number 2 bank. And I said, the second thing you need to understand is that I work a lot of hours. I don't expect you to. I expect you to have enough sense to know when to work and when not to work. That's my rule. Mm-hmm. And it's like everybody here's got a tie on today. I said, get rid of them. I've closed more loans as a lawyer in the last month than you all made, and I never saw a tie. And I said, if I have to tell you how to dress, I don't need you. But I said, the most important thing I want to say today is, if you don't want to work here and have fun, go somewhere else. Because we're going to have some fun. Not just every now and then, but it's going to be a place where you want to get up in the morning and come to work. And, over time, I think if you looked at all of our managers that we had those 18 years, nobody left. I fired 2 or 3 of them who were, kid me, I fired a guy who's dead now, but I called him up one day and I said, John, I'm looking at the numbers. He was in another office. And you made 1 loan last month. Yeah. And I said, I can make 5 loans from your office, from my office. I mean,
maybe he was trying to go by the rules.
Have some fun.
Are there that many rules? And here's one thing I've noticed. I renovated 2 buildings for Athens Federal.
Right.
I guess it's 2, maybe 3.
3.
Maybe 3. And all your employees absolutely love you. You're a legend.
Well,
I don't know if you realize that, not even just in the banking, but you're an absolute legend. I mentioned to a really good banker in town named Logan Young. You know him? He works for Capstar down here. Really good banker. He's put together a couple of deals for people I'm working for. That's I don't know. It's just he's really good. But how do these people? What is it about you that makes them like you and stay with you?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's because we have a. Well, first of all, they know that if they.
Plus Dustin.
I think they know that I understand what they do, and that I don't just understand the numbers. I understand what it takes to do what they do. The good and the bad, the easy and the not so easy. And that I understand that if you and I are working together and we're making loans, we'll have a loss from time to time.
Or you're not loaning enough money.
Sure. And but over time, back to what I was saying, was that I just didn't have people leave. And you know, I meant it when I said, you know, I want you to come to Athens Federal. I want it to be not a place you work. I want it to be your company. You have to own it. And some of my other guys would give me a tough time. I mean, and you would like coming to our executive meeting. I mean, I think you pretty much say what you want to say, and with no repercussion. It's a good communication. Mm-hmm. But anyway, long story short, this guy, I brought him back to the main office, and I think it took 8. I said, look, I know you got a family. I'm not going to terminate you, but you need to get a new job. It took him 18 months to get a new job, and they would give me hell for letting him stay. But he was a nice guy. Yeah. He was lazy, and it's funny. 10 years later, I go to a meeting up in Madisonville, chamber meeting. They had a new chamber director. And this guy who went to work for another company, another bank, was standing there, and I walked up. I hadn't seen him in 3 or 4 years. And he says, "Hey, how are you?" And the new chamber director was standing there, and the guy looks at the chamber director and says, "Do you know Jeff Cunningham?" And she says, "No, but I was hoping to meet him today." And he said, "Well, here he is." And he's, I worked for him for, I forget what it was, 5 years. So I worked for him for 5 years. And he said, "He fired me." And she just kind of looked up, you know, and he said, "Best thing ever happened to me." And he said, "I love him," and hugged me and walked off. So I don't know what the answer is. But at any rate, back to 2008, a couple of points I wanted to make was that, so I contacted investment bankers in New York and Chicago, and we started the process. And it was interesting to have 8 directors. 2 or 3 of them thought that it was going to be a complete flop. Mm-hmm. Well, when you convert a savings and loan, you have this pile of money that's sitting there called capital that the bank has earned over the last 40 or 50 years. And depositors own that, not the management. They own that. You have to have that appraised. You have to have the value of that pot of equity appraised. And the appraisal is done by a third party, and the Office of Thrift Supervision or the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency has a team that evaluates that and approves it or doesn't approve it.
Do they approve every piece of real estate that they've loaned on?
No, it's just it's a valuation of a going concern. And I knew from previous research that typically that pot is less than $1 on $1. So if you have $100,000 there, they might appraise that at $80. So what happens in the conversion is you go out and you sell stock. So if you sold $100,000 worth of stock and they approve it, then at the end of the day, when the smoke clears, you've got this $100,000 that you sold plus the $80,000 that was there. Mm. So your depositors who get first shot, right, because they own it, they just bought $200,000 worth of stock for $180,000.
Not a real hard sell.
No, if you understand it.
Yeah.
Long story short, the Office of Thrift Supervision won't let you generally, or the OCC, they're not going to let you go out and raise $50 million if you don't need it. You know, they're going to put, you got to have a use for it, right? So what they call is the minimum and the supermax. So they told us that based upon our size, after we raised money, that we could only raise, I think we had to raise $8 million or the deal was off, and we couldn't raise more than $27 million. So when the guy said $27 million, we actually had directors that started laughing, you know. Anyway, long story short, we raised so much money, we had something like 37 million or 42 million actually paid in, and phone calls for, I don't know how many, 10 or 20 million dollars more, and which we, you know, couldn't take. And so it was much better than we ever thought it would be. And then over the course of time, we bought stock back. We bought branches. We opened offices. One of the ways that you lose money in banking a lot of times is when you go buy another bank, because you overpay for it, or in hindsight you overpay for it because you don't have the same management team. You don't, if it's a bigger organization, sometimes you don't have the same touch with the community. And so over the time, it becomes less valuable. You've seen it when people have bought people.
Sure.
And so
and so many of these,
we didn't do that for that reason, is that we thought it was better to either open an office or expand an office that we had. Because you remember, when you buy another bank, typically you're paying a multiple of value. So if the book value is 10 and you pay 1.8 times book, you're paying twice, 1.8 times what the book is. Well, it better be worth that.
and didn't First Citizen sell out for like 3 times?
They sold out in the 90s, I think it was, or early.
Right before.
Yeah, when things were really good. And so today, typically, I'm talking about the 21st of August or whatever today is, you're typically seeing 1.2 times 1.5.
Let's take a break. The Bank of Cleveland is a well-run bank.
Scott Taylor's a fine banker, and he's got a great clientele.
When he's in charge, you can just, it's okay, right? Wouldn't matter what it was.
I think that's probably true. I don't know
It wouldn't
Scott
matter
that
what it
well,
was.
but I certainly have a lot of respect for him, and I've worked with him on a couple of things, and we're on the Cleveland 100 together. And, but I'm not, we don't go out to dinner or whatever, but he certainly has a good reputation, and it'd be all right if he invested some of my money. I would trust him.
Now, let me ask you this. On any given day, you could see this lawyer, this businessman, banker, hauling hay. Am I right?
You can see me doing other things, yes.
Putting up hay?
Putting up hay, or I'm going today to ted some hay when we...
Ted, what does that mean?
Well, it's just a hay tedder. When you cut it,
Oh, you
it spreads it.
spin
fluffs
it.
up.
Spin it out, yeah.
Mm-hmm. My guy at my farm calls it twirling. You want to come
That's
over
what
and
I
twirl
was
some
going to
hay?
call it, but I didn't want to call it that. Now, the house you live in, how long have you lived there?
We've lived there about 18, 19 years. I've owned that farm for 20-something years, as I've told you before, it was built before the Civil War.
Yeah.
It's a fabulous place to live.
Like what, 1850 or something?
Well, we know that it was started from or we think we know, that they began, the guy that built it, his father was a Revolutionary War soldier, officer.
A patriot.
Yeah, and his son, a guy named Jonathan Thomas, came to that location. And I can't remember how many thousand acres he had. And he was the first justice of the peace. And would hold court in my study.
Is that right? Real court?
He would hear cases there. And so, but at any rate, he came and bought this farm in 1819. He was born in 1799. He's buried on my farm. His tombstone is 1799.
What was his name?
Jonathan A. Thomas. And I bought the farm from James B. Thomas. I'm the first guy not named Thomas to ever own this farm.
And he's buried on the farm?
Yeah.
Is it a grave site? Is it a grave, like
I got
several
a
graves?
graveyard of people there.
Is it registered with the whatever?
I don't know. You can come up and see it if you would like it. But he's got his stone
He's
there.
got a stone?
And they probably need to preserve his stone somehow. But at any rate, so I basically, the walls of my home are 3 bricks thick. And some 4. And so I've told you this before, but I went to the Masonry Institute in Chicago, and they figured out the formula. And I had a guy from New York named Bill Barber who had moved to Athens, a wonderful guy. He's deceased now. He's about your age, or would be. He had started in masonry repointing old buildings.
That's an art.
And so I repointed every brick on that house and took the chimneys down and rebuilt them. They were in disrepair. But at any rate, on the inside, it had horsehair plaster.
Real horsehair.
Yeah. Strands of horsehair that they had cut and put in the plaster to give it strength.
I bet it worked, did it?
Oh, yeah. And so we took it down and put fiberglass cement, fiberglass reinforced cement on the inside of the walls, and then built a 2x4 or 2x6 partition. So I really built a house inside a house.
That would make the wall that thick.
And the reason I'm telling you that is that when we took all this plaster down and this lathing that the plaster was on one of in the master bedroom, on one of the boards, it has a date. And I can't remember the date. It's like April the 2nd, 1850 written on it with pencil.
Golly. That's before Gunsmoke.
So anyway, we've lived there, and that's been.
Is there something about the house you say, man, this old house, it's just so inconvenient, this thing, that since it's so old, or is every day just man, I love this place?
Oh, it's a fabulous place. I wouldn't live anywhere else, and neither would my daughters.
And you got a spring right there by your porch.
Yeah, an artesian spring.
Artesian spring.
And that spring's on some of the earliest maps of Tennessee.
I've seen that.
So I need to do a better job, keeping it up and that kind of thing. But, you know how that goes. In my barn out by the road, I had a guy from University of Tennessee come down, and he dated the barn by the saw marks on the lumber and the nails. And he says, my barn was built just right around the end of the Civil War. It's got pegs. When I say nails, I use those square nails on the outside, but the structure is built all with heart pine and pegs.
No ghost?
The only thing I can tell you is that I'm a honey connoisseur. My father was a beekeeper, and I feel bad that I'm not. But you know Alan Benton at Benton Country Ham.
Yeah.
So Alan and I are both sourwood connoisseurs.
Yeah.
And we go over, in fact, I've got to call him tomorrow. There's a place over in Andrews, North Carolina.
I've been there. I love that place.
All right, well.
You ever been to the movie place there?
No. There's a guy over there named, I can't remember his first name. He and his brother, Alan, introduced me to him. We were over there last year, but Allen sells their sourwood honey, and you see sourwood, but people, there's a lot of fake sourwood out there. And now I don't know this for a fact. It's what my dad was the sourwood guy, because he grew up on the plateau. And true sourwood guys will tell you that you have to be 2,500 feet above sea level to get true sourwood honey. The guys in Andrews will tell you that's true. The guys on the plateau, it's only 2,000 feet.
Right.
And what happens in sourwood honey, as told to me by my dad, I've not talked to a scientist, but I asked him one day, I said, well, he's dead now, but I said, what is sourwood honey? You ever thought about that?
That's what I was going to, that was my next question.
Yeah. Well, here's what he told me. I don't know if this is true or not. He says that bees don't like sourwood. They don't.
What is sourwood?
Sourwood is a tree that grows here. It grows here.
Sourwood tree.
Sourwood tree, and it blooms.
Uh-huh.
It has a big white bloom about 6 inches long. It's a beautiful.
And bees don't like it.
Well, they don't prefer it, I think is the word he used. But what happens in certain mountainous places in the Appalachians, because of the blooming that takes place, you know how some plants bloom later if they're up higher on the elevation. Yeah. Because of the blooming schedule, generally speaking, all these bees will be up there working these plants, and then there'll be a 2 or 3 week period where nothing's blooming but sourwood. And they don't have a choice but to eat the sourwood nectar then. And it produces this robust.
What do you mean robust? Strong?
Well, it's a stronger, smoky flavored, I call it smoky flavored honey. I can smell it and tell you the difference. And so, but it's rare to have true sourwood.
True sourwood.
And so these guys, the Batemans over in Andrews, they're the real deal.
Bateman's sourwood honey?
I'll get you the name of it, but I think they sell most of it wholesale. But so anyway, we go over and get that. I don't know what I was talking about.
What's the idea of you having to eat local honey so you don't get allergies or don't get a cold? You heard that?
I have. That may be true, but I like sourwood. I'll eat it wherever it's from.
What do you eat it on?
I eat it every day.
Toast?
Well, I have a 14-year-old lab, and he likes sourwood on a buttered biscuit, and I get up every morning and make that for him.
You make a biscuit?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a frozen biscuit. I mean, but I cook a biscuit for him. And
put butter on it and honey, or just honey?
Both. Mm-hmm. And if I'm not, and sometimes I'll eat them, sometimes I don't.
So you cook this dog a biscuit every morning?
I get up and have coffee, and I spend about 30 to 45 minutes on the markets. So while I'm looking at that, I'll just throw it in the oven for him. And my dog's name is Boomer, and and throughout life you have a friend or a job, or maybe you have a home that's a once in a lifetime deal. He's a once in a lifetime dog. I've owned lots of dogs. My dad was a houndsman. He loved to hunt and had hounds and shepherds, and but now this is the kindest. He's the kindest, most loving creature. If I go out and mow somewhere on the farm, he'll go out with me, and he'll find a little knoll or something to sit on so he can watch me. And he'll sit in the shade and just sit there till I'm finished, and then he's ready to.
I've got one of them, and I tell you, when it died, I can't hardly think about it right now. In fact, I got his picture in the next room. Her picture. Boy, it's disturbing. When you have an animal like that, it is a...
And my youngest daughter, who just started UT this year, she's an animal lover. Mm-hmm. My mother was oh gosh, she loved animals and as much as people. And but they do bring, like you say, potential sadness. But boy, they bring a lot of joy to your life, I think. And
it doesn't have to be an animal. It can be that other thing.
Sure.
And you wonder if it's that thing or if it's just that time in your life that you were experiencing it.
That's a good point, but I think in this case it's my.
How did you get to come across him?
Well, he's my daughter's dog, and we got him out on the farm, and he went missing. We have 6 dogs. All of them, or most of them, are strays. People throw them out, and we, mm-hmm. And I'm sure we don't keep them up. They just, they don't bother anybody.
Yeah,
My house sits right in the middle
They're
of the
welcome
farm,
to stay too, right?
Yeah, and they don't bite or anything like that. They will bark at a bicyclist. I had a bicycle guy who had to sue me one time because my dog barked at him.
What'd you tell him?
And I used hand signals. I didn't say anything to him, and he rode away. That's
the McMinn County coming out.
That's the McMinn County way. That's right. And so he runs away. He leaves. I tell my wife the next morning. He must have been 6 months old. I don't know. Maybe he wasn't that old. And I said, maybe you should call Swap and Shop and on the radio and tell them that you've lost a dog. And so she did. And she gets this call the next morning, and it's a secretary at an elementary school. And she says, I think we've got your dog. The kids went crazy in the 4th grade. This dog was looking in the window. And they adopted him and fed him, and he sits by their door.
For how long?
Just a couple of days. And the teacher has allowed him to sit on a bed inside the room while the class is going, and he just sits there.
Golly.
And Denise goes over there, and he sees her. He jumps and runs and gets in the van and came home and got in his crate and wouldn't come out for about 3 or 4 days. So I don't know if that affected him or whatever, but he prefers humans.
Wonder how he got there.
To the school?
Yeah.
Well, it's 2.5 miles the way the crow flies. So.
Well, animals are a strange thing. How we've domestic. I mean, they know what you're talking about, don't they?
Yeah, and growing up, here's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. He said and you've probably had people come and talk to you about this, about all of the rules and regulations that Mike Bell is a friend of mine, and I helped Mike when he first ran for a representative, and so I'm certainly not blaming anything on him, but it seems like that we elect people and they feel a need to pass a law or a rule or a regulation as some sort of signal to us, the voters, that they're doing something. And over the past, I was having a discussion the other day with a farmer friend of mine, and he says, we were talking about privet that gets in your creek.
Yeah. Been doing it for years, right?
Yeah. And, you pull out the privet. Well, now they've got a rule that, you can't pull out the privet unless you do it with a mule. It has to be non-mechanical, which makes no sense.
No sense.
Environmentally.
No sense.
Why does it, if it
Yeah.
hurts if it hurts you environmentally to pull it out, what does it matter, the way you pull it out? And I told one of my legislators, I said, I see now where you guys have passed I said, one of my memories from childhood is my grandmother burning her leaves.
Mm-hmm.
And now that's a misdemeanor. And I could name you 20 more, but it
in the construction business, it's even worse.
Yeah. And so if you live on a 1,000-acre farm, you can't let your dogs be unleashed. I mean, it's just...
That's why you have 1,000 acres.
That's why you have
so
it.
you don't have to leash your dog.
Well, yeah, and you have your dogs unleashed because there are things that happen on those 1,000 acres. You don't want a raccoon getting in your feed.
I hate to see a dog chained up.
Yeah, and so on and so forth. And so we're disserving ourselves. It's almost like we think that there's some sort of a problem or that we have to show. It's similar to what's going on in corporate America now, is that everybody wants to be woke.
I can't even stand the term. I don't even know what they're meaning.
Yeah.
But you've got a good point that these people get into office and they think by making a rule that they can show us they're doing something. Yeah. What would happen if somebody got up there and said, hey, I've been here 4 years and I've not made one rule?
Well, you and I would celebrate that
yeah,
person. But
I'd say, hey, what's his name? I'll vote him.
It's not having backbone. And the reason is that they respond to every squeaky wheel. So somebody calls and says, Dee Burris has got a donkey that's...
Well, I've got a letter saying mow my yard out here from the city. That's the last rebellion I've got.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what happened to me. I'm in the deal right now, so I own some real estate. Well, my manager, this real estate's in a LLC with a strip center and some other in this particular investment. And so the city of Athens, notorious, will write you a letter and say, if you don't mow this in 10 days, we're going to mow it and send you a bill. Yeah. So my manager, who's in Chattanooga, was gone, and they sent us a letter, and he was gone for 2 weeks, and I guess the letter came on when he left. And anyway, long story short, they mowed it. We pay $110 to mow it. It is in the city, and we have to keep it mowed, and that's fine. It's not hurting anybody.
Yeah.
But it's funny, the city owns its own property with much higher grass than what we have. Well, they send me a bill for $550 for mowing it. So I called the guy and I said, I'm not going to get angry. This is absurd. I mean, if it costs that much to mow, the city needs to get rid of its machines and its laborers and just subcontract, because I can have anything mowed, for 20% of that.
And what if you couldn't afford it?
So, anyway, we're on the same page on that. But the rules are everywhere. I'll tell you this one last thing about rules. So they asked me to come and speak on ethics at Tennessee Wesleyan to the students in the business school. And I was honored to do that. And what I told them was just a series of experiences that I've had as a lawyer, as a banker. I mean, my daughters say I should write a book about it, but one of the things I told them about, I had a friend of mine call me. I used to work as a lawyer for the Special Investigative Unit of, I guess, 2 or 3 insurance companies. And the SIU units are some of the more interesting. That's when there's some allegation of something's not right here, when somebody makes a claim.
Yeah.
Usually the policyholder has stolen his own money and made a claim, or burned his own house, or It could be a variety. They're all interesting cases. But one of my buddies calls me and says, "Hey," he asked me about a case that he knew that I had, and we're talking, and he says, and I'll try to shorten this up, but he says, well, I had this case, and said there was a 21-year-old and a lady and a 31-year-old lady, and they met at an intersection in a collision. And so I'm telling this story to TW that my point was, I said, look, things have changed. The people have expectations of you, perhaps that you don't realize. I said, we have the rules of professional responsibility in the legal profession. And we have an ethics class. But I never heard much about ethics other than in those things. And I said, today, ethics has gone from what I would call natural law.
Manners?
Well, a natural law, the old doing, the golden rule, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To this whole sphere of things that you and I might not without reading. So I'm telling this story, and I said, they're everywhere.
Everywhere.
Everybody's got their own expectations
right.
and their rules. And I said, oh, let me tell you a story. And so I told them they meet. And so they get out, and the 31-year-old's got this guy with him. And he's a handsome-looking guy. And he's eyeing this 21-year-old. Mm-hmm. And they're waiting for the police to come. Yeah. And I guess the 31-year-old kind of catches that, and he's talking too much, or maybe she's giving him.
Yeah.
And so they sort of get into it in a verbal confrontation. And the police come, and then they leave, and they both report it to their insurance company, and a lawsuit's filed. I don't know which one of them filed a lawsuit, but they couldn't work it out because it was not clear from looking at it whose fault it was.
Yeah.
So the lawsuit goes on. And as that happens in these small collisions, it was $5,000 or $6,000 worth of damage. It wasn't a big deal. Nobody was hurt.
Yeah.
And nothing happens. Well, about a year later, while this lawsuit's pending, the 21-year-old gets up on a Saturday morning, gets her 6-year-old son, and they go to a birthday party at noon. So they arrive at the birthday party. There are, 10 or 12 kids at the birthday party, and their moms and their dads or whoever brought them. They're, having a big time. And then at 12:30, a clown comes in. And
I can see it coming.
And the clown comes in and is up there putting on a clown show. No, you missed it, because I'm going to tell you what happened. So the 21-year-old's sitting there, and she realizes that clown is the 31-year-old. God. And so after it's over, they get into another verbal argument. They just don't like each other, right? Nothing physical, but a verbal argument. So nothing happens. So spin forward, it's time to take depositions in the case, and so they meet at the lawyer's office. And the 21-year-old her lawyer's asking the 31-year-old about what happened, and all the things you normally ask in a deposition. So at the end of the deposition, he says, "You're a clown, aren't you?"
Oh, golly.
And she says, "Yes, I am." He said, "In fact, you remember on such and such date, you went to a birthday party?" "Yeah, I remember that." And my client, her son went, "Yep." "And you said something to her. You smarted off or gave her the finger or something. I can't remember what it was." He says, "No, I didn't do that." And he says, well, you would deny all the other witnesses that are there? If I have other witnesses that said you did that you all got into a verbal altercation. We got into an altercation, but it was her fault. I didn't say anything to her. I didn't say anything to anybody. And he says, so you want me to believe, and he recites the facts again, and she leans over the table and he says, sir, there's no way I would do that because that would be in violation of the Clown Code of Conduct. Well, as funny as that sounds, when you leave here today, Google Clown Code of Conduct. There is one. It's in writing, and all clowns have to sign it if you want to be in the Clown Association. So my point to the students was, there's this list of expectations and conduct out there in all these things you do and everywhere you go that you don't even know about. Because government and society has started to place its expectation on us, which brings me to my final point on this, and I'll shut up, is that I think, anyway, that the problem that we have in America on both sides of the political spectrum and in business and everywhere else is, and I'll relate this back to why I think we were very successful in the banking business. Our country was founded on individuals, the importance of an individual, that individual's belief in God, that individual's work ethic, that individual's family, that individual's right to own property, that individual's right to seek liberty and happiness. We've swapped that in many things that we do. We've gone from a society that values the individual to a society that values the corporate collective good. We do it in healthcare. We ration healthcare based upon what's cheaper. We look at how many people we can get on a healthcare plan or Medicare or Medicaid, not what the plan's doing for the individual. And you can look all across society and see that the laws that we're passing are all pointed toward the collective. Not all, but in many cases. And less respect and recognition for individuals. Our agencies work that way. If you went and asked, say, someone at the district attorney's office, is this a well-run, and I don't mean Steve Crumps, but is this a well-run, well, how do they measure that? They measure it by how many collective convictions and pleas they had. They don't measure it by the old adage of better for 100 guilty to go free than one innocent guy to be guilty. We're beyond that. We don't care anymore. And the juries sometimes, or most of the time, are not of that ilk.
You've actually put this in what I've been thinking, but I couldn't put it in those words that you did. We've exactly flipped.
Yeah, we've lost the value of the individual.
And the power of the individual.
Yeah, if you go to, in the internet, which seemingly was going to make this better for the individual, has in fact turned into herd mentality.
Herd mentality.
And so, which is also the antithesis of the individual value in many ways. And so, it's interesting, the herd has drowned out the individual even on the internet. So if you go, for instance, and it permeates our society, We could get in our car today and drive around. I'll use this because I'm a lawyer. If you talk to lawyers, you might say, well, gosh, Dee, what kind of year did you have the first 6 months? 9 out of 10 times, you know what they'll tell you?
What?
What their billables were. They won't tell you the story of representing the individual that needed the help.
They won't say, boy, I really helped this people down here and we were so successful.
It's not top of mind. It's not top of shelf. And I'm not being critical. You know, you used to have, now you have public defenders where you used to have lawyers appointed. And to some degree, that has relegated the accused to more of a number, because we made the public defender's office, but we didn't necessarily fund them appropriately enough. And so a lot of this stuff is, when I say something about woke, I don't have a problem with that at all. What I have a problem with is people using it.
That's what I have a problem with.
And so you've got all these expectations that are couched in all of these societal and maybe that's how it's supposed to be. Maybe I'm just old.
It doesn't seem to be working very well. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah. So we're going to have some more honest we're going to have some people who represent us that perhaps like the three of us would conclude that we have more trust in them than just somebody that wants to give you a sound bite or somebody that wants to, that is afraid that, everybody, the internet, I heard it, I think it was the guy that owns the Dallas Mavericks say that the internet had sent everybody to their corner.
And they're telling us what the other side said.
Yeah, and so we go in our corner because that's where we feel comfortable, because we feel threatened with all this shouting and stuff on the, the other side. And so I don't have any answers, but I do, like you, feel some of the problems that I feel and see out there. And but back, and I'll circle back and I'll answer any questions that you have. But I don't mean to, because I'm not ending the interview or the discussion. But this is all related to what we started talking about to begin with. And
Exactly.
To communicate with people and to give them value. People don't feel that in their relationships, even their commercial relationships anymore. So you asked me about Athens Federal. How were we able to do that? One was communication. Communication kept us where we needed to be in the Great Recession. We're communicating with our clients before it started, communicating with our lenders before it started, so that we all knew what was going on in the books and what the expectations were. And then continued communication, I think, raises value in people's mind. Not mass communication, but to find a way to communicate where you and I have a feeling at the end of the communication that we both know what the other one said and what it means, what it meant to the sender, and what it means to the receiver.
There's huge value in that.
Yeah, and I think people ask me, well, what are you going to do now? And are you going to start another bank? Are you going to do this? And my answer is, well, I'm already doing some things, but if I have the opportunity to buy a small bank or That's basically what I'm looking for. Is that would be step one, to realize that opportunity exists. Number two would be to answer the question, can you take whatever ball of clay it is, whether it's a small bank or a finance company or whatever you want to do, and in this day and age, can you take it and form it in a way that you're able to facilitate the communication and the other things that we're talking about. And I think that's still possible, but it seems to be getting more difficult all the time.
Well, let's say that I've got $100,000 and I'm going to put it in a CD, and I can go to my local bank and I can put it in there, or I can get on the internet and I can get the list of the CDs and the ones that's the highest and punch that at some bank somewhere that's FDIC approved. And it's safe. There's no question
insured.
whether it's safe. It's safe. Is there still room for the guy sitting at the bank and saying, come in here and put it in my bank?
Sure.
Is that ever going to leave? Is there somebody in the garage going to invent an app that loans money, and like they're doing the checking the cash now, you can do it online instead of going to the... Is that going to end, or is there still a need for a guy to say, I'll loan you the money and here's how we'll do it?
The answer is yes. There is a need for that. And
will it always be there?
well, I don't know about
Because
always.
we're saying there's one thing. Is that the one specter of our economy that's not going to change? Because everything else has.
Well, I think it changes. Let me tell you something I did as a banker that few others did. I hired a corporate trainer. And I hired him. If we went out today and went to any office that you might choose, and we walked around, took our camera guy with us, and we asked everybody in that office, do you know technology? Do you understand technology? And more specifically, do you know how to operate a computer? Every one of them would say yes. Mm-hmm. But if we set them down, what you would find is that most of them know what they have to know. And that's all. They know how to facilitate that application on that computer to get their job done. They don't necessarily know how to facilitate it to get their job accomplished in a very efficient manner. They just know what they've figured out or what they've been told. And it's the same way with a customer. If I were starting a bank today, one of the first persons I would hire would be a trainer. And I would get you and whoever into the boardroom for a luncheon. And I would say, hey, look, we've got this wonderful mobile app, and you know how to do 3 things on it, but it actually does 50 things. So we're going to have a little lunch today, and we're going to learn 10 of the things that you can start doing that you're not doing now on your phone. And I would do that every day.
That doesn't get rid of the customer, it helps the customer.
Sure. And it ties the customer to you in a relationship because they see that you're giving them value that you can't get. I told my employees in 2006, I think it was, I said, look, here's how you need to look at banking. they can sell money cheaper in New York than we can in Athens by selling money. I'm talking about they can gather deposits cheaper than we can because they can do it in bulk. But what they can't do is they cannot have a relationship that's real. And so we have to acknowledge that we might be a quarter of a point off on the funding. We might not be, but we might be. But we can always be a quarter of a point or more ahead on the relationship.
Does the new generation come up? Are they interested in relationships?
Some. Enough to be in business as a bank and enough to attract people who are. And when you say the new generation, remember the people who hold all the assets are mostly 50 and over. Those assets are going to be changing. Actually, they're about 60 or over who hold the lion's share of all assets in the world.
So you're saying that even though this new generation and new technology, they don't think these businesses, whether it be banking or any, they think they don't need relationships. You're saying that eventually they need relationships.
Yeah, well, they need them now, but eventually they'll figure out. I mean, how many times have you called someplace and you get a recording?
Well, I hang
or if you're
up.
trying to get some help.
I hang up. I went to a bank last week. I closed my safety deposit box out. Going to move it. I had to stand there till they let me in. They were talking to each other. Were not waiting on me. I know the manager was talking to the lady. I'm not stupid. She wasn't talking to a customer. And the other lady knew I was standing there. And I'm closing it out. And while I was there, I closed out my whole checking account. Nobody stopped me. They said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm closing my account."
I bet they haven't called you either, have they?
They hadn't even called me. They didn't even.
Yeah.
They didn't even. So these banks get bought out, and it's like a race to see how fast they can get rid of customers. I just can't. I can't understand it.
Well, you know, all customers are not valuable to an individual, to some banks. And some of them run their local operations off of a template.
Yeah, let's say my safety deposit box, they get $100 a year. I had two of them, they get $200. I'm no value to them. So why would I expect them to have value in me?
And so some cat up in Charlotte or New York is sitting there thinking, okay, look, our deposits in Cleveland have dropped from 80 million to 40 million. So therefore we need X number of employees. They're not looking at the value that any particular employee would. Back to what we were talking about. It's a corporate prophylactic view of the world, not a view of individuals.
Same thing.
Yeah. So I've been at the bank about 4 weeks and this guy comes to see me. He sits down, I'm guessing he was 70. And he says, I have 3 CDs coming due. And I think at the time, I can't remember if it was 100,000 or maybe 50,000. Well, anyway, I can't remember what the FDIC coverage was at the time. Anyway, he says, they've offered me 6%, and I need 6 1/4. I need my quarter point bump. And I said, well, Mr. So-and-so, why have you been getting a bump? And he looks at me and says, because I am who I am. That's what he said.
Yeah.
He said, you don't have many people in your bank that have $700,000 in your bank, which was true. And I said, well, I'm looking at my printout here. You don't have a checking account here. He said, no, I do all my business down here at such and such, where I've been for years. And I said, I try to leave some money up here. And I said, well, you're not doing your other business here. You don't have a checking account here. I'm looking at the relationship. And I can't pay you an extra quarter of a point. He said, and to answer your question, he says, well, son, that's how business is done. And I said, well, let me ask you a question. Now, I'd only been there 4 weeks, right?
Yeah.
I said, the lady who used to keep me when I was a child, while my mother worked at the courthouse, has $4,900 in this bank. In this bank. And the reason I know that is that she was in here this morning. And she has a CD, and it just renewed for 6%. And I said, tell me why. I said, she doesn't have a checking account here, but her husband does. So tell me why I would pay her 6% and pay you 6 1/4. He said, well, if you're that dumb, he said, because I've got $750,000. I said, I can pick up the phone and buy $750,000 anywhere I want to for 6% or less. Mm-hmm. He said, yeah, but I'm me. I'm here. I said, yeah, but you don't have a relationship with me. He stands up and says, I want my damn money and you'll be out of business in a year. And I said, well, I might be out of business, but I'm not going to pay you more for the same thing than I'm paying the guy that works at the local factory.
That's
not
right.
going to do it. And if that puts me out of business, I'll be out of business. Well, the same day, a guy walks in my office who was a friend, and he says, Jeff, let me tell you something. You need to spend more time at the country club. He said, you are a member of the country club, aren't you? And I said, yeah, I'm a member, but I hadn't been up there. My girls swim up there. We might go 4 or 5 times a year to swim. But yeah, I'm a member. He said, well, you need to spend more time. Because that's where things are done. And I just look at him and I pick up this printout. I'd had them when I came up there print me out every single checking account. Because I knew that where you make money and where you don't. And the balances and the names and I pulled it and I just thumbed through it. And I said, well, his name was Charles. And I said, Charles, I'm looking at all the loans I have here and all the checking accounts I have here. I don't recognize anybody I see at the country club. And I'm thinking of all the clients that I have as a lawyer. And I don't see them at the country club. He says, how many checking accounts do you have? Because, savings and loan, most of these old S&L guys, they didn't want checking accounts. It was just a hassle for them. Mm-hmm. And long story short, I had about 1,470 checking accounts. And probably 14 years later, I think we had 14,000.
Golly.
And I didn't get them at the country club. So the expectations, this first gentleman, he, to his credit, he's passed now, but his idea was what he knew. It's like a bear that gets in your garbage or whatever. That he knew where he could come and get his extra quarter. He's trained. And the new generation, if you will, or let's go back to the middle generation, mine and your generation, we know enough about technology to at least ask or inquire. Mm-hmm. And I understand that most banks would tell you now that the biggest uptick in the usage of technology they're seeing is in their older customers, because they're figuring it out. Okay, and a lot of it is they don't have to come to the bank, right? And then you've got the new, my daughter's a nurse practitioner, my oldest, and I haven't asked her, but I bet you she couldn't tell you the last time she was in a bank. Doesn't want to go in a bank, I'm sure. But again, that's learned. Mm-hmm. That's what her friends do. That's what, I think when they graduated or went to work at Vanderbilt, they had some guy from like Bank of America come and signed them all up, 100 of them up. It's learned.
Pretty slick, wasn't it?
Yeah, learned, right? Mm-hmm. That's why I hired a corporate trainer, is that a lot of this is learned, and a lot of people are ignorant to value. I'm ignorant to certain values. I learn stuff all the time. I read a lot. I mean, you go in my study, there'll probably be
biographies or
anything,
science,
anything. I'm reading one now on Einstein, and I've got. I'm reading I can't remember the guy's name, but he's written a book about just society. And I don't always finish them, but I'll speed
read them enough to know
well, if it's interesting, I'll read them carefully. But I read a lot, and I know that there are so many things I don't know. I mean, that I'd love to know. There's only so much time. I hope to be, Charlie Munger.
Yep, Charlie Munger.
The Buffett's partner.
Yeah.
He and Buffett read about 10 hours a day. And different things. And it's not just financial statements. But Charlie's written a lot of things that I've read. A lot of articles on psychology.
You're a proponent of Charlie Munger?
I am. A lot of articles and, like one thing I don't know much about from a study point is psychology. Now I know psychology, I know street psychology.
Yeah.
But I've just found in the last year I've been reading, and I find it interesting that there's a lot about psychology that I should have known.
That is real.
That's relevant to what we do every day.
That's right, yeah.
And he's written this wonderful 20 or 30 page article on psychology that I am reading for the second time now. But anyway, back to, I know there are things that I don't know. And we need ways or the means or the impetus, if you will, to seek those things and seek out the things that we otherwise wouldn't know or wouldn't come in contact with. And I think that's just human curiosity. Some people have it at a higher level than mine's happens to be pretty high. I imagine yours is. But I do think that you can have this relationship in banking or in any business that's built on trust that will supersede the ease of technology. And I think as much as we companies try to convince us that we cannot have a relationship with technology.
You're saying that a business can be advanced in technology, use technology to their advantage, but still have customer relationship.
Well, I think you have to view it, no, I think you have to, but I think it's how you understand it and how your employees understand it, but more importantly, how the leaders understand it. Is that every piece of technology that we have should be, if we're training our employees and have a strategic plan that means something, every piece of technology we have and that we utilize should be focused on improving the relationship.
Not doing away with it.
Right.
That's so well put.
Enhancing the relationship. And if you won't get that right all the time.
That's genius.
But if you do that, then they're not going to leave you. So I'll say this and I'll be quiet, but what does that mean? And I've thought a lot about this. What does a relationship mean in business?
Yeah, what advantages?
Yeah, so you can get good service sometimes in business and have no relationship.
Sure.
Probably rarer,
sure.
But you can.
But it's very possible.
Yeah, and it's happened to all of us. And so I think that a relationship in business has to do with a continuing expectation of trust. You might not call me, but in the back of your mind, you know that if you do call me, I will answer. And that is the foundation. You may never call me. In the meantime, while you're not calling me, if I can provide you with the tools to have a meaningful experience, that'll only enhance this trust that I've been trying to build on the back of the end. So the meaningful experience is one of the things I noticed. One of my executive team told me one time, and I'd never thought about it. And he said, "You know, Jeff, have you ever noticed that when people are out doing something who work at Athens Federal, they're proud to work here?"
That's true.
And I started thinking about that, and it was true. I started asking customers about that, and it's true. They were proud to work there. And the reason was they could solve people's problems on this relationship segment and solve it as a professional and feel really good about doing it. So at the end of that deal, they felt good and the customer felt good. And it's just what you just said. You know, the customer is going to refer you. He's going to refer you that business. I told the students at TWU, I said, you know, I gave the commencement speech this spring. And I said, you know, I was reading some article, or I can't remember where I saw this, but it said a group of different type of scientists looked at all the greatest of all time in all different and said, why are they great? And they came up with one simple similarity. And that similarity was they were willing to do things that others weren't. They didn't necessarily have a better golf swing, but they were willing to swing it 20,000 times to make it better. You know, they would shoot 1,500 free throws where everybody else would shoot 200. or
these Olympic athletes are not there by accident.
right, or the scientists,
Or the scientists.
you know,
Or the bankers.
Newton. I mean, all the over and over and over and over again. So you can translate that into what I did for the students. Is that basically you can translate that is that they were committed. And I've told a lot of people this when I bought and sold companies as a lawyer, did the work. One thing, it just hit me just out when I was doing a metal fabrication business. This guy's selling it. And he'd been in business a long time. And I said, Roy, why do you think that you were so successful? And Roy was fairly uneducated, and and he said, I just stayed in it. I stayed in it longer than anybody else. And I said, what? He said, yeah. He says, things happen and they go in the ditch, or they get frustrated. And he said, I just kept committed to coming in and hammering out the metal every day. And he said, and I got to thinking about all the companies I had sold, and that's what they did.
Yeah.
They just, they stayed and committed. And I told the students, I said, so what that guy's telling you is that, you have to make a commitment to something, which we don't see a lot today. I said, the second thing is you have to stay the course. You have to find a way in your life where you can sustain that commitment. And I said, why is that important? It's important because when you go to work every day, you got two groups of people looking at you. You've got your peers, and you can say what you want, but they know if you're committed. They watch you. And I said, and you've got your supervisors. And they hear what your peers say, and they see your work. And I said, it's interesting to me that people can go into something and then complain that they're not getting the work that they want, or they're not getting the promotions that they want, and they wonder why. And most of the time, it's because the people promoting them and the people evaluating them are looking at their work. And they see the world, for what it is. And I said, the other thing you need to remember is your customers know you better than you know you. Don't
That's
ever forget
interesting.
that. I said, for instance, if you go to the dentist and get a crown, and there's a slight edge on that crown, the dentist, i.e. you go on to the next room in the next chair. This customer is sitting at home 2 weeks from now, cussing you, saying that guy's not worth it. Because your customers live with your work. You don't. You may think about it, but they live it. So if you want somebody to send you 20,000 bank customers, do them a good job. If you want somebody to cost you 20,000 customers, do them a crappy job. And it wasn't what you thought in that 30-minute interaction. But you're sowing the seeds for your success. And so you have to commit to something, and you have to sustain it. And it's there's nothing romantic about that.
What if you get so much business you can't handle it?
You have to have sense enough to know that.
Then what happens when you do it, when you get there?
Well, you can mitigate.
You go up?
I've been there.
Go up?
Yeah.
You have to charge more?
Well, you have to mitigate in 2 or 3 ways.
What does mitigate mean?
You have to make sure you don't have too much business.
But when you do, what do you, I mean?
Well, there's not one answer. Is that one is that you have to tell some people. I mean, I get calls.
Yeah.
You wouldn't believe how many calls I get right now. I don't have a law office. I don't have a number. But they'll get my number and they'll call me. And I represent people right now. And so, but I'm not doing it for a business. I'm doing it because I like to do it, right? But you just have to tell people no. 9 out of 10 people who call me today, I may have an office a year from now, I don't know. But 9 out of 10 people call me, I send them to another lawyer.
You try to help them.
Yeah, well, I'll talk to them about their case.
Yeah.
I'll say, well, you know, it looks to me like this is your issue. It's not a 2-minute call.
Yeah.
It may be a 30-minute call. And, but so you mitigate. I mean, you got to have a place to put them, right?
Place to send them.
Place to send them.
Why? Because
that's that relationship.
That's that relationship.
And you got to have.
And it's the right thing to do.
Sure. You got to have. My wife says, "Why do you answer calls on Saturday or Sundays?" And I said, "Well, one is my clients made me, and I feel an obligation to them. Okay, even if the guy called me, he's not my client. One of my clients gave him my number, and I always figured just if somebody's sitting somewhere on 8 o'clock on a Saturday night, and their problem's bothering them enough for them to have the balls to call me."
The least
I'm going to at least talk to him for 5 minutes. It's not going to hurt me.
Isn't that the right thing to do?
You know, yeah. And, you know, I'm not going to just...
He didn't want to call you.
Right. Yeah, but you would be surprised how many lawyers we have now who won't even answer the phone calls of their clients.
Yeah. Or you can hear them writing down the time while you're talking, so they can bill you for it.
That's right. So you can mitigate. You can have sense enough to, you know, any strategic plan that you have in your business should anticipate what you need to do to make sure you don't have too much business, to handle the business that you're going to keep.
Refer some.
You hire, you train, you
go
automate.
Up and go up a little bit.
You automate. You might go up, you might not. You might
mitigate more.
Yeah. And so, but it works out. But you can't ignore it. I'll give you that. And so
you can't ignore it.
If you ignore it, you're going to get in trouble. You'll either get your clients in trouble, or you'll get in trouble, or you'll negate a lot of this goodwill that you've been trying to build. You know, it only takes a little bit to negate. You know, I told a guy a couple of weeks ago, he calls me and tells me this deal, it was a pretty good deal. And one of the two guys behind the deal has a reputation of being a little greasy. I'll use that term lightly. Yeah. And he says, "Well, what do you think?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to give you the Warren Buffett rule." And he said, "What's that?" And I don't do business with people I don't trust. I'm not going to, as long as I can feed my kids. Mm-hmm. I'm just not going to. And you can make some money in this deal. I'm sure you can. But you're always going to be worrying if this guy's stealing from you. Mm. And so my advice to you would be to say thank you, but I'm doing other things right now. You know, I had an investment banker call me this past Monday and said, "Hey, I've got a deal I want you in on. We can use your expertise, and I'm going to send you a non-disclosure, and then you get it back to me, and then we'll have a conference call." And I said, "Hey, I appreciate it, but I was just looking at my calendar, and I have a tremendous amount of things planned over the next 3 or 4 months, 2 big things that I'm working on. And I don't know if it'll happen or not, but if they do happen, it's going to require all of my interest and all of my attention for about 3 months. So I just think you'd be better off to get
You
somebody
didn't even go.
else.
You didn't even hear it. Don't even want to hear it.
No, just because I'd probably been tempted if it was good to.
Yeah.
And I know, because I've done this before, I know that these two deals I'm looking at, one involves a bank, that if I do this deal, I need to be totally focused.
You didn't even want to be tempted by this other thing.
So then he's mad at me now. He told another guy
Yeah.
that I was a.
Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he didn't. Right?
Yeah, and I had another guy text me on the same thing, and I don't know if this one's mad at me, but I just said, hey, I appreciate. I was nice. I said I appreciate it, but I'm looking at these two things, and my attention needs to be focused.
It's like when somebody calls me to buy a piece of property and I don't want to talk to them because I'm already looking at it and I don't want to get it confused with what they're doing.
Yeah, or I'll have people call me and say, think about this. I'll have people call me and say, hey, I want to hire you to buy Glenn's store. And I'm already representing somebody to buy Glenn's store.
Yeah.
But he doesn't want anybody to know that he's thinking about buying Glenn's store.
So now you got a problem.
What do you say?
Well, now you got a problem.
Yeah.
What do you say?
Generally, I'll just say, hey, look, I can't talk to you about this because I have a conflict. I'm not saying, I learned this a long time ago, I'll say, I'm not saying that Glenn has hired me. Right?
Yeah, you're not saying that.
But I'm see that in his mind when we hang up. Well, by gosh, Glenn's hired him, or I'll say I'm not saying I've talked to Glenn about this, but I've got a conflict, and I hadn't talked to Glenn about it. I'm talking to another guy.
That's right.
But I'll say I'm not saying I'm talked to Glenn about this, but I've got a conflict. That's pretty good, isn't it?
I tell you what, Jeff, you are a legend for a good reason.
Well, you're kind.
And I would hate to compete with you on any level.
Well, let's be partners then.
I'd love to.
Thank you.
Thank you.